She bandaged the Mafia boss's wounds. Next day, 200 of his men surrounded her house. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's go back to our main character. My name is Emily Carter, and before that night, my life fit neatly inside a quiet block of Maple Street where nothing ever happened after 9 p.m. I worked early shifts at a neighborhood clinic, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and measured my weeks by grocery lists and laundry cycles. The night I met him, the air was cool and smelled like rain-soaked asphalt, the kind that makes streetlights glow softer than usual. I was locking up when I heard a careful knock behind the building. Not loud, not urgent, just patient, like someone who knew how to wait. When I turned, I saw a man leaning against the brick, tall, composed, and clearly hurting, though he tried not to show it. His suit was dark and expensive, the kind you notice even in low light, and his breathing was controlled, steady, almost practiced. I asked if he needed help, already reaching for my phone, and he shook his head once, slow and deliberate, as if phones were not his solution. There was a mark on his side where fabric had been torn, nothing graphic, just enough to tell me he'd pushed himself too far to get here. I hesitated, because caution is something women learn early, but then he met my eyes and said, calmly, "I won't stay long." That was all it took. Inside the clinic, the fluorescent lights hummed as I cleaned the area and wrapped it carefully, my hands steady because that's what training teaches you to do when your mind is racing. He watched in silence, not flinching, not asking questions, his presence filling the small room without effort. I told him my name. He paused, then said, "Victor," like it was a favor. When I finished, he adjusted his jacket, testing the movement, and for a brief second his expression softened, not gratitude exactly, more like recognition. He thanked me once, pressed a folded bill onto the counter that I refused, and then he was gone before the streetlight outside flickered. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the quiet return, telling myself it was nothing, that I'd done what anyone would do. Morning came with sunlight and coffee and the ordinary comfort of routine, until the sound outside my house changed everything. Engines idled. Doors closed softly, again and again. When I looked through the window, my street was lined with black vehicles, and men stood where my neighbors usually walked their dogs. They weren't loud. They weren't threatening. They were simply there, watching, waiting, like a promise I didn't remember making. And in that moment, I understood that the man I had helped was not lost at all. He had been passing through my world, and now his world had found me. I did not open the door right away. I stood there with my hand on the deadbolt, counting the space between breaths, listening to the quiet outside that felt heavier than noise. When I finally looked through the peephole, I saw suits, black and precise, men standing at respectful distances like they had measured the sidewalk with a ruler. No one touched the lawn. No one spoke. They were not here to break anything. They were here to claim space. I stepped back, heart steady in that strange way it gets when fear settles into certainty. I changed out of my pajamas, pulled on jeans and a sweater, and reminded myself that this was still my house. When I opened the door, the air felt cooler, cleaner, as if the street itself had been reset. A man at the front inclined his head slightly, not a bow, more like acknowledgement. "Miss Carter," he said, using my last name as if it had always belonged to him. "He would like to speak with you." I asked who he meant, though I already knew. He did not answer. He simply stepped aside. Victor stood near the curb, hands relaxed at his sides, coat immaculate, posture calm. He looked the same as the night before, except now the quiet around him made sense. He was not hiding. He had never needed to. "I told you I would not stay long," he said, voice even, familiar. Enough to make my chest tighten. I told him this was unnecessary. I told him he could have called. He nodded once, as if filing the comment away. "I needed to be certain," he replied. "Certain of what?" I asked. He looked at my house, then back at me. "That no one else would mistake your kindness for weakness." I did not invite him inside. He did not ask. We stood there with the morning light catching on windshields and polished shoes. I told him I helped him because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted protection or attention. He listened without interrupting, which unsettled me more than an argument would have. When I finished, he said, "I understand. That is why I am here personally." I asked him what would happen next. He did not answer right away. A car passed at the end of the street, slowed, then turned away. "Nothing will change," he said finally, "except that you will not be alone with the consequences of doing what was right." I laughed once, sharp and surprised, because it sounded like a line from a movie. He did not smile. "You do not owe me," he continued, "but I owe you, and I do not leave debts open." I told him I did not want this world near me. He met my eyes, steady, unoffended. "It came near you the moment you opened that door," he said softly. "I am only making sure it does not stay." There was no threat in his tone, no demand, just a statement delivered like weather. After a moment, he stepped back. The men around us shifted, subtle, coordinated, like a tide turning. "If you need anything," he said, and placed a card on the railing without pushing it toward me. "You will not have to explain why." Then he turned away. Engine started. Doors closed. One by one, the cars rolled off my street until Maple Street looked like itself again. I stood there long after they were gone, the card warm against my palm, realizing that kindness had a reach I had never measured, and that the quiet I loved had just learned my name. I tried to return to my routine, because routine is what keeps fear from spreading. I went to work, smiled at patients, measured blood pressure, counted pills, and pretended my street had not learned a different language overnight. For 2 days, nothing happened. No black cars. No quiet men. Just autumn light and the familiar hum of the clinic refrigerator. I told myself Victor had meant what he said, that he would leave things as they were. Then I noticed the changes that did not announce themselves. The broken porch light was replaced before I reported it. A delivery I never ordered appeared at my door with groceries I usually bought myself. When my car stalled at a red light on Main Street, it started again before I could panic, as if it had been waiting for permission. None of it felt invasive. That was the problem. It felt like consideration. On the third evening, I found him waiting across the street when I got home, leaning against a sedan that looked ordinary until you looked closer. He did not approach until I closed my car door. "You are not angry," he said, not a question. I told him anger would be easier. He nodded, like someone who preferred hard truths. "I wanted to be sure you were adjusting," he said. I laughed quietly and asked if people usually needed to adjust to being noticed. He looked at me for a long moment. "Most people want it," he replied. "They just do not say it out loud." I told him I did not want anything that came with conditions. He answered immediately. "Then do not accept conditions," he said. "Accept clarity." We walked a few steps together, the sidewalk familiar under my shoes, the distance between us measured and deliberate. He did not touch me. He did not crowd me. He simply kept pace, like he was making a point about restraint. I asked him why he trusted me that night, why he let a stranger see him when he could have gone anywhere else. He considered the question, eyes forward. "Because you did not ask who I was," he said. "You asked what I needed." That settled into me heavier than praise. I told him I did not want to be part of anyone's ledger. He stopped walking then and turned to face me fully. "You are not," he said. "You are a line that closed an account." There was a softness there he did not seem to notice, like a man used to carrying weight alone. I asked him, what would happen if I told him to disappear completely? He did not hesitate. "I would," he said, "and I would still make sure nothing followed me back to you." I believed him, and that belief scared me more than his presence. When we reached my porch, he paused, respectful of the threshold. "You do not owe me time," he said. "But if you choose to speak with me again, it will be because you want to understand, not because you are afraid." I asked him if understanding changed anything. He smiled then, just slightly. "It changes how heavy the quiet feels," he said. He left without another word, footsteps fading down Maple Street. Inside, my house felt the same and different all at once. I sat at my kitchen table and realized that my kindness had not been a mistake, but it had been an opening. Not into danger, exactly, but into a truth I had never planned to meet. Some people collect power. Others learn when to lay it down. I did not know which kind Victor Hale was yet. I only knew that he had stepped back when he could have stepped closer, and that choice echoed louder than all the engines that had come and gone. I thought I understood the shape of my days again, but understanding is not the same as control. A week passed, then another, and Victor did not return, not in person, not by message, not by quiet presence across the street. The changes continued, subtle and almost considerate, like a hand adjusting a picture frame when no one was looking. My neighbor mentioned a new patrol schedule that kept the block quieter at night. The clinic received an anonymous donation that paid for supplies we had been rationing. I told myself coincidences stacked when you noticed them, that my mind was connecting dots that were not meant to touch. Then one afternoon, a woman I had never seen before waited for me outside work. She was polite, well-dressed, and spoke my name with careful neutrality. She said she represented people who were curious about me. Curious was the word she chose, and it settled wrong. She asked questions that sounded harmless until you listened closely, about my routine, my family, how often I walked home alone. I answered vaguely and excused myself, pulse steady but alert. That evening, Victor called for the first time. His voice came through clear and unhurried, like he had waited until the moment mattered. "Someone spoke to you today," he said. I asked how he knew. "Because they were not authorized to," he replied. He did not sound angry. He sounded precise. I told him I did not want to be watched. He answered, "You were not. You were noticed." The distinction felt thin. He asked if I was afraid. I said no, then corrected myself and said not yet. He accepted that. "I will come by," he said, and added, "only if you allow it." I surprised myself by agreeing. He arrived after sunset, alone, carrying nothing but the quiet that seemed to follow him. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had once counted ordinary worries. He explained without details, without names, that attention followed outcomes, and outcomes followed choices. "Your choice created a ripple," he said. "I am here to make sure it fades before it reaches you again." I told him I did not want protection that turned my life into a perimeter. He nodded. "Then we set boundaries," he said, as if that were a language he respected. He asked what I wanted. The question caught me off guard. I said I wanted my mornings back, my walks, my quiet. He listened, then said, "That can be arranged." I asked what it would cost. He met my eyes. "Nothing you did not already give," he said. "I will not take more." There was a pause where words could have turned into something else, but they did not. He stood to leave, then stopped. "One more thing," he said. "If someone asks you questions again, call me. Not because you are mine, but because you are owed peace." When he left, the house did not feel smaller. It felt steadier. The next day, the woman did not return. The week after that, the quiet came back the way it used to, imperfect but familiar. I realized then that Victor was not trying to enter my life. He was trying to step between my life and a shadow I had not invited. I did not know what that made us. I only knew that for the first time since that knock behind the clinic, the air felt normal again, and that normal had learned a new definition. Time did not erase Victor from my thoughts, but it changed how they arrived. He became less like a disruption and more like a variable I had not accounted for, present without demanding space. Weeks passed quietly. Winter crept in with shorter days and a sharper cold that made Maple Street feel smaller. I found myself noticing patterns I never had before, the way unfamiliar cars never lingered, the way problems seemed to resolve before they fully formed. It should have unsettled me. Instead, it made me attentive. One evening, after a long shift, I found Victor waiting by the clinic, not hidden, not announced, just there as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He asked if I had eaten. I said no. He suggested a diner 2 blocks away, neutral ground, lights too bright for secrets. We sat across from each other with chipped mugs and laminated menus, ordinary in a way that felt deliberate. He did not talk about his world. He asked about mine, my work, the people I helped, the small victories that never made headlines. He listened the way few people do, not filling silences, not steering the conversation back to himself. I realized then that restraint was not something he practiced only when necessary. It was part of how he moved. When the check came, I reached for it first. He did not stop me. That mattered. Outside, the cold pressed in, and for the first time I asked him something personal. I asked if he ever regretted the power he carried. He took a moment before answering. "Power is not heavy," he said. "Responsibility is." That stayed with me. A few days later, the call came in the middle of the night. Not an emergency, not panic, just his voice, calm and clear. "There is information you should have," he said. He explained that my name had come up again, not as a target, but as leverage someone believed they could use to test him. He told me this not to frighten me, but to be honest. "I will close it," he said, "but I will not do it without your consent." I asked what consent meant. "It means you decide how visible you want to be," he said. I can make you invisible, or I can make your boundaries unmistakable. I chose boundaries. He accepted that without question. The following days were uneventful, and that was the point. No strangers. No questions. The quiet returned with a firmness I had never known. When I thanked him, he corrected me. You chose this, he said. I respected it. The line between us shifted then, subtle but real. Not closer, not farther, just clearer. One afternoon, as we walked the block, he stopped and looked at my house with an expression I had not seen before. Not possession, not concern, something like recognition. You changed the trajectory of a night for me, he said. People assume it takes force to do that. They are wrong. I told him I did not want to be the reason. He softened. He smiled faintly. You are not the reason, he said. You are the reminder. As he left, I understood something I had been circling for weeks. Victor was not trying to pull me into his world. He was adjusting his around the fact that I existed, and that choice, quiet and intentional, was the most dangerous kind of devotion I had ever encountered. The first real disagreement happened on an ordinary Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Victor picked me up after work, not in anything flashy, just a clean sedan that blended into traffic. We drove without music, the city sliding by in gray winter light. He told me he had a meeting later that evening and suggested I stay at a nearby cafe instead of going straight home. The word suggested caught my attention. I asked why. He answered honestly. It would be quieter for you, he said. Tonight is complicated. I told him complicated was not a reason to redirect my life. He glanced at me, then back to the road. I am not redirecting, he said. I am anticipating. That was when I felt it, the tension between protection and control, thin but real. I told him I did not want my safety to depend on his calendar. He listened, jaw set, not defensive. Your safety does not depend on me, he said carefully. My decisions account for you. That distinction did not satisfy me. We pulled over near the river, the water dark and slow, lights reflecting in long lines. I asked him if this was how it would always be, subtle adjustments made without my input, quiet corridors built around my days. He took longer to answer than usual. I am learning where your edges are, he said. I will not cross them. I told him learning implied mistakes. He nodded. It does, he said, and I accept the cost of correcting them. I asked what that cost looked like for someone like him. He met my eyes then, steady. Distance, he said, if that is what you choose. The word landed heavier than any promise. I realized then that Victor was not afraid of losing leverage. He was afraid of losing alignment. We sat there, the hum of the engine soft, the city breathing around us. I told him I needed to know that my life remained mine, not a variable he managed. He listened, then did something unexpected. He handed me his phone. No explanations, no conditions. Just placed it in my palm. If you want to understand what I am protecting you from, he said, you can ask questions. If you do not, you can walk away. I did not look at the phone. I gave it back. Understanding is not ownership, I said. He smiled faintly. No, he agreed. It is respect. We drove again, slower this time. He dropped me at my door without waiting. That night, I slept poorly, not because I felt unsafe, but because clarity can be unsettling. The next morning, there was a message waiting, brief and precise. He apologized for assuming. No justifications. No explanations. Just acknowledgement. It should have been enough. It was almost enough. When we met later that week, he asked before making suggestions. He waited for answers. He adjusted. I noticed how effort showed in small ways, the kind people overlook when they expect force. I told him that if he ever decided my presence complicated his world too much, he should say so. He answered without hesitation. You simplify it, he said. Because you make me choose. That was when I understood the real conflict between us was not danger. It was agency. And as long as he continued to offer it instead of taking it, I could stand in the space between us without losing myself. The warning came quietly, which was how I knew it mattered. Victor did not call. He showed up at my door just before dusk, coat buttoned, expression composed but alert in a way I had learned to recognize. He asked to come in, not because he needed permission, but because he respected the ritual. Once inside, he did not sit. There has been movement, he said. Not toward you, but around you. I asked what that meant. He chose his words with care. Someone is testing whether proximity creates pressure, he said. They are wrong, but they are persistent. I told him I was not afraid. He did not contradict me. You do not need to be, he said. But you do need to be informed. He explained that attention had shifted, that curiosity had returned in a different shape, less direct, more patient. I asked if this was because of me. He shook his head. It is because of what you represent, he said. An outcome they cannot predict. I asked what he needed from me. He surprised me again. You're normal, he said. Do not change your routes. Do not cancel your plans. Let me remove the noise without altering your life. I told him that sounded like control dressed as comfort. He accepted the criticism. Then call it coordination, he said. With consent. Over the next few days, the city felt the same and different at once. My walks were uninterrupted, but I noticed the rhythm of traffic adjusting, the way certain corners felt watched without feeling threatening. One afternoon at the clinic, a man asked for directions he did not need. He thanked me too carefully. That night, Victor called and asked if anyone had spoken to me. I told him about the man. He listened, then said, "Thank you for telling me." The following morning, the corner felt ordinary again. I realized then that danger does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it waits to see if you will shrink. I refused to. A week later, Victor asked me to meet him at the diner again. He looked tired, not physically, but in the way someone looks when they have chosen restraint over efficiency. It is resolved, he said. I asked what resolve meant. He smiled faintly. It means they learned that attention does not equal access, he said. I asked what it cost him. He considered the question. Time, he said, and leverage I did not need. I told him that sounded like a loss. He shook his head. It was an exchange, he said, for something quieter. We sat there with coffee cooling between us, the ordinary hum of the place, grounding the moment. I asked him why he kept choosing the slower path. He looked at me, eyes steady. Because you are watching, he said, and because I prefer to be accountable to someone who understands restraint. The word accountable landed with weight. I realized then that the danger had not been external. It had been the risk of becoming smaller to accommodate safety. Victor had not asked that of me. He had adjusted himself instead. When we left, the night air felt clear. At my door he paused. If you ever feel crowded, he said, say so. I told him I would. He nodded, satisfied. As he walked away, I understood something essential. The world he moved in did not bend easily, but it did respond to intention. And intention, when paired with respect, could quiet even the loudest shadows without ever asking me to step aside. The night Victor finally spoke without armor did not feel dramatic at first. It was raining lightly, the kind that turns streetlights into soft halos, and we were sitting in my living room with the windows cracked open for air. He had come over at my invitation, not because there was a problem, but because there was space. We talked about small things until the silence shifted, becoming deliberate. He looked around my house as if seeing it fully for the first time. The mismatched furniture, the framed photos, the life that had grown without force. I need to tell you something, he said, not as a warning, but as an offering. I nodded. He told me about the moment after he left the clinic that first night, how he sat in his car and realized no one had spoken to him like a person in years. Not with fear, not with calculation, just care. It disrupted me, he said simply. I am not used to that. He explained that power trains you to expect transactions, to believe every kindness hides a price. You did not ask for anything, he said. That created a debt I could not quantify. I told him that was never my intention. He accepted that. I know, he said. That is why it mattered. He admitted that he had tried to protect the feeling by controlling the environment around it, by managing variables instead of addressing the source. You corrected me, he said. You did not let me turn you into a perimeter. There was no apology in his voice because he had already given one. This was something else. A reckoning. I asked him what he wanted now. He did not answer immediately. He stood and walked to the window, rain tapping lightly against the glass. I want to choose differently, he said. Not because it is safer, but because it is truer. I asked what that meant for us. He turned back, expression open in a way I had not seen before. It means I will not place myself between you and the world unless you ask me to, he said. And it means I will accept whatever distance you need to keep yourself intact. The honesty in that felt heavier than any promise. I told him that I was not afraid of him, but I was cautious of what proximity could change in both of us. He nodded. Then we moved slowly, he said, with permission at every step. We sat again, closer this time, not touching, the space between us defined by choice rather than hesitation. He told me that people assumed men like him were immune to being changed by gentleness. They are wrong, he said. Gentleness is the most precise influence I have ever encountered. I realized then that Victor was not asking for salvation. He was acknowledging a shift. I told him that I could not be his anchor. He smiled faintly. I do not need an anchor, he said. I need a compass. The rain eased. The city breathed. When he left later that night, he did not look back, trusting that the door did not mean retreat. I stood there alone, aware that something fundamental had been named. Not love, not yet, but intent. And intent, when spoken aloud, changes the trajectory of everything that follows. Spring arrived without asking permission, and I realized that was fitting. The trees on Maple Street budded quietly, and the routines I had fought to protect settled back into place, altered but intact. Victor did not disappear from my life, but he no longer hovered at its edges. We met by choice, not necessity, in spaces that belonged to neither of us alone. Sometimes it was the diner, sometimes a walk along the river where the water moved steadily, indifferent to power. He spoke less about his world and more about decisions, about what it meant to choose restraint when speed was easier. I listened, not as a witness, but as someone who mattered to the outcome. One afternoon, as we sat on my porch steps watching the light change, he told me he was stepping back from certain arrangements, delegating influence he once guarded personally. It is inefficient, he said, almost amused. I asked why he was doing it. He looked at the street, then at me. Because I learned the cost of attention, he said. And I prefer intention. That was when I understood that what I had given him was not care alone, but perspective. Weeks passed without incident. The quiet held. When people spoke of Victor Hale, it was with the same myths and assumptions as before, but something had shifted beneath the surface. He had not lost power. He had refined it. And I had not lost myself to proximity. I had defined it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he asked me a simple question. Are you content? Not happy. Not safe. Content. I thought about it, about the clinic, the neighbors, the life that still felt like mine. Yes, I said. He nodded, as if that answer completed a calculation he had been carrying for months. He stood to leave, then paused. I want you to know, he said, that nothing you did obligated you to stay. I appreciated that he said it out loud. And nothing you became obligated me to leave, I replied. He smiled, genuine and unguarded. As his car disappeared down the street, I stayed on the porch a while longer, listening to the ordinary sounds I had fought to preserve. I realized then that I had not fallen into a dangerous story. I had stepped into a precise one, shaped by choice rather than fear. I did not save a Mafia boss. I treated a wounded man because it was right, and the world responded in ways I could not have predicted. Power noticed. Intention remained. And in the space between them, I learned that quiet does not mean small. It means deliberate. The night I closed the door, the house felt steady, grounded by something earned rather than imposed. I had not been claimed. I had been respected. And that, more than any promise or protection, was the ending I chose to keep.